I'm Jeremy Parrish, and this is Game Boy World. Given that it showed up a mere month after Game Boy's Japanese debut, I honestly have no idea why Tennis didn't just appear at launch. The best I can come up with is that Nintendo wanted to give baseball some space. Both were sports titles, both used the link cable for head-to-head play. The difference between the two is that baseball was a creaking relic, an agonizingly literal adaptation of a badly dated NES game. Tennis, on the other hand, felt much more like something people actually wanted to play in 1989. Granted, tennis still suffers from the same fundamental frustration as baseball. In single-player mode, the computer has an insane advantage over the player. It can serve far more effectively than you. It can return your volleys with ruthless efficiency. No matter what difficulty setting, that is, speed, you play at, the CPU can utterly stomp you. I mean, I don't play a lot of sports games, but I'm pretty good at video games in general. Tennis, though, absolutely crushed me while I worked on this review. It was kind of depressing. What sets it apart from baseball, though, is that the process of being absolutely crushed wasn't laborious or frustrating. Tennis moves at a rapid clip, incredibly rapid at its fastest setting, and your player moves smoothly. You can trace Tennis back to the original NES game by the same title, but this is no mere port. Significantly, the original Tennis was developed, at least in part, by Intelligent Systems, whereas the Game Boy version appears to have been put together entirely by Nintendo R&D 1. So while the general mechanics and play of the two versions seem similar, Game Boy Tennis is effectively an entirely new game built on the foundations of the old, rather than a mere conversion. It features the smoothest animation yet seen on Game Boy to this point, and the link cable adds a new dimension to the action. See, in a competitive match, each player gets to view the court from over his or her own shoulder. This allows for a dramatic visual perspective that adds a little something to the action without increasing the difficulty for the player opposite. The link cable actually makes a significant difference in terms of play options, too. The NES game featured a doubles mode, whereas the Game Boy version replaces that with a split perspective, head-to-head play. Doubles doesn't appear as an option, but that's presumably because of the cramped screen dimensions. The court already feels aggressively tiny, and the player character seems relatively huge on screen. So doubles probably would have worked out as a mess. Instead, you have a purely competitive take on tennis. And that's definitely how you want to play it. As with baseball, a competing player makes a far more reasonable and balanced opponent than the ruthlessly efficient CPU. With these changes in mind, tennis makes for a faithful, if limited, take on the sport. The real-world rules are presented fairly effectively, though Mario's role as judge will cause you to grow to hate him when you get onto a losing streak and he calls matches against you again and again. The Game Boy would see better and more sophisticated tennis games over the years, but CPU unfairness aside, this very first take on the sport holds up quite well, with chunky, nicely animated characters and surprisingly smooth play action, not to mention excellent link cable support. Tennis made for a strong early release for the handheld. For more on Game Boy's history, check out GameBoyWorld.com.